Welcome to episode 6 of More with Murphy. Today on the podcast, host Ken Murphy is joined by two very special guests, his parents, James and Martha Blackburn. Married 29 years ago on Valentine's Day, these two know what it is like to have loved and lost, to experience a prolonged illness of a loved one, and to start over. Now with James facing a recent diagnosis of cancer himself, they're reflecting on their lives and embracing each day as it comes. We can't wait for you to hear their story. Now check it out.
Mom and Dad, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of More with Murphy. I remember growing up, I felt like there were multiple times where they say, you're in the hot seat. I remember as a teenager being interviewed, grilled, whatever you want to call it, by Mom. So this is a little opportunity to kind of change the table a little bit here.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Not nearly as comfortable.
Yeah, that's awesome. But no, it is a privilege to be able to sit down with you guys. Obviously, we are socially distanced, well over our 6 feet, distance here. And we'll get into Dad's recent diagnosis of cancer a little bit later in the conversation. But I want to start kind of back in the beginning a little bit more. And again, you all have been married, and we were just talking before, it's 29 years this February?
This Sunday, 14th.
It will be the 29 years on Valentine's of this month in February.
Yep.
And it just seems like literally, that's so fast. I mean, because it seems like it was only a couple weeks ago. I remember your all's wedding out in Oklahoma and how quickly that time goes. And obviously, I'll also not forget it because it was just a few months before Serena and I got married.
Right.
So my mom and I, we were dating at the exact same time. You were dating Jim, I was dating Serena, and I remember a few times we would come home from nights out or evenings out, and that's always a unique experience to ask your mom how her date went, and she asked you how yours went. So, but that's good. Dad, you and I share a special, it has to be one of the rarest father-son combinations that anyone could ever share. And it's simply this: we've both had a hole-in-one in golf. I'll bet there's not that many fathers and sons who could both say that.
No, if we'd done it the same day, though, that would have been
No,
really...
that would have been like Barstool Sports worthy or something right there, ESPN, Sports Center. How long ago did you have your hole-in-one?
I think it was about 4 years ago.
And was it in Indianapolis or?
Yeah, it was a little golf course named Gray Eagle.
Okay.
With a 135-yard par 3. And honestly, we looked for 10 minutes for the ball before we finally found it in the hole.
That's so awesome.
It's amazing, yeah.
That's so awesome. The funny thing is, mine, I had just started golfing. It was the summer of 1995 when I was actually an intern, a summer intern at Cypress, and it was at Thornapple, and it was on the front 9, I think 6 or 7, I forget which number it is, and same thing. We were looking for my ball. We saw it go bounce, bounce, trickle, trickle, and it disappeared. Thought surely there's no way it's there, but it was a fun memory for a lifetime. Speaking of memories for a lifetime, you all together, Dad, and you dominantly, you gave a gift this past Christmas to all the kids, the grandkids, great-grandkids, future grandchildren, family and friends. You wrote out your life story in the form of a book, and I've talked about it a little bit in recent weeks here, and I think that's just one of the neatest gifts you could ever give to family and friends, which is to kind of just write out some of those life lessons and your journey and your story. How long ago was it when you started thinking about that and getting into that process?
Well, you were one of the first ones to put it in my mind. And then Diane, our daughter Diane, mentioned it. And that's been, 4 or 5 years ago maybe, when I started thinking about it and sort of putting down a timeline that I wanted to follow. But, to begin a project like that, it at least it takes me a while to really get to the point where I'm ready to sit down and start writing.
Yeah.
But about a year and a half ago, I started started writing, and off and on, I didn't write every day. Sometimes I would have to think for a week before I could even get started on the next section of time. But it took about a year and a half.
Well, I tell you, as I read the book, a couple of things. One, even if you weren't my dad and I didn't know the family, it was just so fascinating to read, to hear the stories, frankly, of a different era from when I grew up. But it also helped me to even, I would say, understand. I learned things about you that I didn't know.
Sure.
I never knew why you loved Duke basketball so much. I could never figure it out. But when I read the story of what Duke University and the role it played with your mom,
Right.
when I read that, I was like, that's why Dad is a Duke University fan, true all the way through. A couple of things I want to hear just a little bit more about, though. You talk about in the book that you took your driver's test in a vehicle that I have never heard of anyone else taking their driver's test. You mind just sharing a little bit with us about what you drove for your driver's test?
Well, my dad operated a rolling store, and it was just a chassis, a truck chassis that had a bus body on it. And so we used that and drove all around the county and sold groceries to people who couldn't get out or get to a grocery store easily. And I was 13 and a half or so when Dad one day said to me, he said, well, do you want to drive? I said, drive? How can I do that? He said, well, I'll show you how. And so he went through all the gear shifts and everything, that you do when you start learning to drive. And that went on for a few weeks. And once or twice he put me on his lap and I just, drove the vehicle. Finally, one day he said, well, I want you to try it. So I sat in the seat. I couldn't even reach the pedals. He had to find a pillow to put me on, and he pushed the seat as far up as he could. And he said, put it in low gear, let the clutch out slowly, and it'll move forward. Well, I put it in low gear and let the clutch out too slowly, and the bus started going backwards.
Oh my.
Really scared me half to death. And he yelled, hit the brakes, which I did. But finally was able to kind of get it moving, and I drove it on to the house a couple of miles that day. And from then on, anytime we would get out on one of our weekly routes around the county, he would find a place where I could get some driving experience, and he would let me drive. Turned 14, and in Tennessee in those days, you could get your license at 14. And so he put me through some rigorous training, and then he picked up the manual for learning the driving rules and laws of the state, and he said, now memorize everything in that book. And so it took me a few weeks to do that, but then one day we just went to Kingston, which was the county seat, and I took the written test and passed it. And then it was interesting. As I recall, the instructor came out and he said, well, what car are we going to use? And Dad pointed to that bus sitting over there, and his eyes got big, and he wondered what in the world's going on. But he says, well, if that's what you're going to drive, we might as well take the test in it. So he drove me around town and didn't try to do any parallel parking or anything.
That's awesome.
But I passed the test, and so from then on, I did any days when I was helping Dad, I would do the driving, and he had a nice little comfortable chair where he would sit, visit with the customers, and I would drive and then jump up and wait on the customers, and he just enjoyed a little vacation time.
When I read that, that's like Uber Eats or, grocery. It's so novel that grocery stores now deliver to your door. And what year would that have been, thereabouts?
Oh, it was in 1948, 49.
Yeah. So your dad was an entrepreneur,
Yes, he was, very much so.
figuring out ways to meet needs
Yeah.
for people before it was even, kind of the thing it is today. The other thing, it's just interesting, when I read, again, as far as indoor plumbing, that was not really a part of the house you grew up, was it?
It was, at least we had running water in the house.
Okay.
Because that's one of the first things Dad did when we moved to the little town of Rockwood, Tennessee. We did not have running water in the house, but there were 3 neighbors close by, and none of them had it either, but Dad got with them, and so they had a neighborly project and dug the ditches and put in running water. So at least Mom had running water in the kitchen.
No,
But
did you have a bathroom?
we had no bathroom facilities. No,
So you still, it was you going to the outhouse.
that's right. About 150 feet from the back porch, and that was
Yeah.
what we. Those were the facilities we used
Yeah.
through all my high school years.
Yeah. And another cool part is your family of origin growing up, although it was modest means in a very small home, it was always open for family and friends.
It was. At different times, Mom and Dad would invite, or one of their siblings, younger siblings, or a nephew or niece would ask to come and live with us for a while. I remember in the 5th grade, I believe it was, I had a cousin that came, and she lived at our house. We didn't have room for her, but she did because something was going on in her home back in West Virginia. And so we went to school together. She was just like my sister. And Mom and Dad did that over and over. Sometimes some of Dad's younger sisters came, and they would live for months at a time with us. And but that was my mom and dad. They were very hospitable and open and loved their family, and they were just happy to do that.
And it goes to show that love and hospitality, and I would say the home I grew up in with you and Dad, was very similar. It wasn't so much the size of your house, or
Yep.
I was such a kid I didn't realize that the size of your bank account, but it was really about the size of your love for just other people and making them feel welcome.
That's right. And, you're right. It's not the size of the house. It's the size of the heart. That's what
Yeah.
makes the difference. Yeah.
You all have been married, as we said, 29 years. You and my father, how many years was it you and Dad were married?
24 and a half.
24 and a half. How long were you and Della married?
We were married 32 years.
32.
Yeah.
So it's to have, and obviously Dad died I never really knew him as a healthy man my whole years growing up.
No, you wouldn't, because you were 18 months old when he had the strep throat that led to end-stage kidney failure.
Yeah. And I know we had like the dialysis bed in the basement for a while, and Dad seemed like he did dialysis all the time.
Yes, 6 hours, at least 3 times a week if he were healthy.
Yeah. And I remember even going on vacation, we would plan for, like, near a hospital, he could actually go do
Yes.
dialysis while we were on vacation. But that just became normal. I mean, I just thought, well, I guess everyone does this. Isn't that true, you think?
I think so. I remember when you talked to me once about, you said, well, I just thought everybody had a parent that had health issues and critical issues.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of normal for you. Although it was interrupted with a lot of different hospitalizations.
Yeah. And then, like I said, multiple hospitalizations, failed kidney transplants, shoulders, knees, and eventually it was the failed liver transplant.
Yeah. We got hepatitis from all the blood transfusions.
Yeah.
He had over 200 units of blood, And back then they didn't, I don't know if they tested it all as carefully as they do now, but when you're either going to get the blood or die, you don't take a lot of
Yeah.
testing before.
Talk just briefly, Mom, about that one season where you, as the caregiver, Dad was in critical care for a number of months, and you actually sent me away to live with another family member for a while.
Yes,
Maybe sent me away is not the best way to say it, but I had a different place to go live.
well, yeah, I think so. I was so concerned about your having to be in with life and death issues every day. And your father was, Bob was hospitalized 100 miles away from where we lived and pastored. And you were, so little. You were, between 2 and 3. And I felt like with all the pressure, how could I be 100 miles away taking care of him, and how could you have what you needed? And my oldest sister, Ruth, offered to come and get you and keep you during the time that your dad was hospitalized. And in order for I was concerned, and we had about 40 prayer partners that prayed that you would not be damaged uh, because of this. That's the very age that child psychologists tell you the bonding takes place with your parents. And in order not to keep you upset, you would get on the phone with my sister and talk to her about what you were doing, and I was listening, but you didn't know it.
Mm.
And then your dad, when you finally, after about 6 months, you came back to us, your dad was afraid that you wouldn't recognize him because he had lost over 100 pounds and he was in a wheelchair. And your Aunt Ruth and Uncle Bob did a great job of educating you about your parents. And when you got off the plane, you came just running as fast as your legs would take you, and you knew both of us.
Wow.
And I always felt like that was an answer to prayer.
Yeah. Eventually, Dad passed from this life to the next. He died Christmas morning,
Yep,
1990.
correct.
It's in the book. Della contracted cancer, and you were her caregiver. Just a length. I remember when I read that part, and just the struggle. You and Della were in California at that time, and then
Yep.
actually Darren and Darla, those who were around Cypress, at least the Alton Darby campus. Dane, one of our worship leaders,
Right.
his mom is my sister now. I was an only child growing up, but inherited family. But they were singing. I can't remember what was the song they were singing as Della passed from this life to the next.
Oh, they sang for probably an hour while she was in the process of dying. But the one was now you asked me.
I remember reading it.
Yeah. My Jesus, I love thee. I know thou art mine. If ever I loved thee, my Jesus, 'tis now.
Yeah. And I remember when I read that, I just got emotional just thinking of that. Yeah. Although I don't know that I ever met her, I kind of feel like I know her a little bit because of my love for you and the family and everything that everyone's a part of. It continues. It's who we are.
Right.
You might not have, but Jim was in our house when we lived at Eau Claire. He was traveling for Indiana Wesleyan University, and you were there more than once.
Yeah, a couple of times I visited. Yeah.
I remember I always liked it when other pastors or district superintendents or special guests would come stay in our home. That always meant we had a big breakfast the next morning.
That's true, because we didn't ordinarily do that.
Yeah. So your first spouses passed on, great relationships. Give me the short version when you had to make the decision are you going to do this again and enter into marriage a second time? Mom, I want to hear from you first. What were your thoughts entering into a new relationship and a possible blended family?
Before your dad died, he told me one evening if he said it's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And he said, when I pass away, I would like for you to be married again. And I said, I can't imagine it. So I don't want to talk about it, and I don't want to think about it. It's just, that's clear out of my scope. And he said, we don't have to talk about it, but I just want you to know how I feel about it. And Jim can tell you about calling me and our first time to go. And I was working at the church and traveling and speaking and teaching at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, Kelly Wood, and I said, I just don't even know if I even want to entertain the possibility. And I even wondered, having been married so long, would I even feel like I was committing adultery? To even introduce somebody else, even the thought process.
Dad, how about you?
It didn't even occur to me for, a year and a half. I just, life just kept flowing and different decisions to be made and that kind of thing that it didn't occur to me until one day I was back in Indiana and Diane and I went out for a walk. That's your older sister.
Yep.
And she just said to me, she said, Dad, we as a family don't want you to be alone. And just know that we would be in favor of you finding someone to love again. And we would love to have a new mother. Well, I was dumbfounded. I hadn't even really.
Did you ask her if they had someone picked out for you, or?
No, I didn't ask her that. I really didn't want her to choose one for me.
Yeah.
I wanted to do that for myself. But probably it was another 6 months or so before I thought about Martha. On Christmas Day that your father passed away, I was at a youth convention in Cincinnati and met the youth pastor from Bartlesville.
Yeah.
Mike and Reva Schultz were there, and they informed me that Bob had passed away that morning, and I was just blown away. I had no idea. And so I sent her a condolence card and didn't even put my return address on it. I just, I didn't even think about anything. But it must have been maybe 6 months or so, maybe 9 months or so after that. I was just thinking about one morning in my devotions, and her name came to me. Now, I'm not saying God said, Jim, this is what you're supposed to do, but it was certainly coincidental, if not providential, that her name came to me in my devotions that morning. And so I thought, maybe I ought to check and see where she is and what's going on, because I remembered her as a very vivacious, happy person, and the kind of person that you could enjoy getting to know better. So I called Bartlesville Wesleyan Church, and this same little Kelly Wood that she was talking about, I was really concerned about her. I asked her, I said, would you happen to know how I could get in touch with Martha? She said, oh, sure. I'll be glad to give you her phone number, her address. I said, well, give it to me and I'll write it down. So I wrote it down on a little piece of paper and stuck it in my pocket and carried it around for at least 2 weeks before I picked up enough nerve to even call her. Yeah. You know, I think you probably read these words in the book. Dating at age 55 is a whole lot different than it is at 17 and 20 or 25. So it took some courage to call her, but I did finally one night. I said, Jim, you're a big boy. Just pick up the phone and call her. And I did, and we must have talked for an hour on the phone. I don't know what all we talked about, but we caught up a little bit, and the rest is history.
29 years later, here we are.
29 later, here we are. That's right.
I remember, Mom, in that era, you said, I'm old enough to know what I want and to know what I don't, and I'm going to make a list to make sure we get it all right. And that is different.
I remember that too.
It is different, though, pursuing a relationship.
It's very different. And being a pastor's wife, I had walked through a lot of journeys of people that have going through, and I realized that, you know, each relationship is different. And so I sat down and asked what is really important to me? The size of house, the bank account, the car you drive, the clothes you wear are not the most important thing to me. And I made a list of everything that I felt like were non-negotiables. And then I made a list of the things that I would like. So when I met Jim for the first time and we were visiting, we were talking about each other, and I said, I'd like to go to my room and get a piece of paper that I've written out some questions I would like to ask you. And I just said to him, you know, it's really scary for me because I was married and I have, you know, this is really, I haven't prayed for somebody. I'm not looking. I hadn't even given it a thought. So I said, do you mind if I ask you some questions? So I went through my questions. And when I was telling you about it, you said, oh, my land, Mom. He must have felt like he was on some kind of a quiz program. But one of the things that I asked him, I know you've been a missionary. I know you've been a pastor. I know you've been in Christian education. But I will never be happy with somebody if they don't have a current vital relationship with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, I said, how are you in God today? And how are you growing? And then I asked, you have 3 children, I have 1. I don't want to be put in the middle. You know, sometimes in second marriages, it's her kids, his kids, and it feels like there's tension and difficulties. And I said, I don't want to be put in the middle. I asked him the kind of relationship he had with his children. And I asked him what he enjoyed doing for fun. And what would he consider a good gift? A refrigerator or a bottle of perfume, you know, the kind of things. Or what was a good date?
I've actually learned that because it was a couple Christmases ago, I got Serena a big freezer for the garage, and I thought it was a great gift. Her birthday was earlier this month, and I got her Coco Chanel Mademoiselle perfume. So I'm even growing. No longer giving refrigerators or freezers as gifts, but I'm growing in my awareness.
Well, you learn as you live.
Yeah, hopefully we do.
But you'll find out about our personalities. When I got through, I said, now, Jim, you've learned a lot about me from these questions. Do you want to ask me anything? You remember what you said?
Well, no, she asked me. She said, well, now, you know, we've talked about a lot of things, and I've learned a lot about your strengths. What are some of your weaknesses? I said, Martha, I'm trying to impress you. What makes you think I'm going to expose my weaknesses now? and I didn't.
Well, the list obviously worked out, and it mended. And one of the things I have always appreciated is, and I think it's been years ago on a Father's Day, I said I loved you at first because of how I saw you treat my mom and how you treated her. But I've grown to love you just because of who you are. And I personally and our family, we've never felt it's just been a unique meshing of different families, different units, and honestly, it's something not to be taken for granted, because even just two people can have that desire, and there can be complex things with adult children and whatnot, but I know that we just feel blessed to be a part of your relationship and our family as it looks today. I want to skip forward. Dad, recently you discovered a lump, and none of the doctors thought it was anything significant. Serena and I drove over to be with you. Just we were able to be there. And then the doctor called and said it was something more significant. Just share with us what the recent diagnosis of cancer.
Well, when they removed it was just a growth under my chin there, and sent it off for studies and everything, and discovered that it was malignant. And they came up with a diagnosis of lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which affects mainly the nodes in the body around the neck.
Was it like mantle cell or acute mantle cell?
It was mantle cell
lymphoma.
Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But what I learned, and I didn't know, there evidently are nodes all over your body. I don't know why the Lord made it that way, but that's the way it is. And so they were concerned that there may have been some, other nodes in the body affected from just this one that was there on my chin. So I went through PET scan, a couple of CAT scans, and bone marrow blood tests and all kinds of things. And they discovered that the only place where it's affected is mainly right here in my neck, and apparently slow growing. And so the doctor has recommended, rather than hitting really hard with radiation and affecting, your lifestyle, they want to just wait a while, maybe 6 weeks, and then run more tests and try to discover how if it's grown at all or moved to any other spots in the body.
And I know they said you all shared, and we were all able to have a family Zoom recently with the kids, and they said they talked a lot about quality of life versus longevity of life and the treatments. And there is another spot like on a cheekbone or something, isn't there? My question is this: having both lost a spouse to prolonged illness, how did you feel? How did you process this news? I mean, it's just a couple weeks old now, a week and a half. How did you process that, just with the history of what you've already walked through? Mom, I'm going to start with you.
I think that we were able to live better with the initial diagnosis. You know what I mean? We would say, well, until we get conclusive tests and we have a chance to talk through this and we have a chance to think about it, we're not going to park there, and it's not going to destroy our life today. Would you say? And I think that was the Lord to help us. We have no illusions. I come from a family that's full of cancer. Yeah. And you do know that I live with the happy camper. We were in the radiologist and the oncologist office this week, and Jim was to rate, or last week, he was to rate his stress level from 0 to 10. and you have to draw it out and everything. And Jim looked at me, and he circled 1, and the nurse and the doctor looked at it and they said, "You got to be kidding." Jim said,
Thought the poor
"No."
guy was in denial or something.
Yeah, Jim said, "No, I think that's about right." And it was kind of like, that's one of the decisions while we're going to Florida. For, you know what I mean? It's that whatever this is or however long, we don't want to miss what living's about. And I think before, for me, it was easier when things get back to normal. What is normal?
I think there's something in there for all of us. I mean, this COVID year, we're coming up
Yes.
literally on 1 year.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
No one's life is normal, cancer diagnosis or not.
Yes.
If you wait for it to go back to normal, man, that's a tough way to live.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dad, how about you?
I think you've got to learn to live with whatever life hands you. And you have to do it with a sense of peace. And that only comes from God. I do feel that through this whole thing, God has given me, and I think to Martha as well, just a sense of peace, that He is in control. And that's exactly where we want to live and enjoy life while we can.
Yeah. I know Serena and I called more than normal to check in, just see how you're doing.
We appreciate that too.
And to be honest, when we would hang up the phone, I'm like, they're either the best liars we've ever heard, or they actually have peace,
Yeah.
and they're actually doing
Yeah.
well,
Yep.
even in the reality of, this diagnosis.
And I feel like that's a gift. And ours is in this arena, but there are a lot of other people that have it in other arenas, and it's just as painful or more.
Yeah. It's detailed in your book. I've seen it for 29 years. I've known you my entire life. I think the other thing that we often overlook is, what's that, Matthew? The wise person builds their house upon the rock. A foolish man builds their house upon sand. What you're experiencing, this peace that you're experiencing, yeah, I do believe God's given you a gift. But I also believe you've conditioned yourselves for 85 years, for soon to be 78 years, to get yourself to the place. You've gone through enough hardship, and you've seen God's faithfulness enough, you can trust Him. Would you say that's true? Or
I would say definitely.
One of the things, one of the values, the great lessons I've gotten from writing the book and reviewing my life as I have, is just looking at how God has worked. Looking in retrospect at your life, it's amazing to see how God has been so faithful in your life. And that, if nothing else comes from it, that is one of the most beautiful gifts I've received, just looking back and recognizing God's faithfulness.
how have you seen God use this, not just in the immediate family, but in the next circle of friends, neighbors, and people? How are they responding to this?
What, to the book?
Not so much the book, the cancer diagnosis.
Oh, well, they've been very concerned. I mean, just the diagnosis, cancer. It's so scary to most people. It's scary to me, for that matter. But we've had dozens of people, maybe hundreds, who have expressed their concern, their love, and offering their prayers for us, and it has been beautiful. It's been a beautiful experience in many ways.
I think maybe too, Jim wrote the book thinking of this is for the kids and the grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
and he never dreamed anybody else would be interested.
That's
But
the
he's
truth.
blown away with the multitude of people that have ordered the book and read it and then have contacted him about it. Um, and I said, well, maybe I tell him he's quite modest. And maybe that's a good thing because they're seeing the real work of the Lord in everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it tells some of the tough things of his life, and yet it's without bitterness and it's with a sense of God had a purpose
Mm-hmm.
and he's accomplishing what he wants, and there's peace and enjoyment along the way.
When I read it, I mean, there's like your work with the U.S. Embassy during some of the upheaval in Haiti
Yeah.
years ago, which is kind of happening now, and I was like, it's almost like the Dos Equis, like the most interesting man in the world. I mean, it's you had a lot of fascinating stories in there. Let me ask you this: if you could go back and give advice to your 30-year-old self, what would you tell yourself at 30? What matters more, and what did you think mattered at 30? But from the perspective you have today, you're like, that. Don't be concerned. That doesn't really matter.
I think for me, I would let God be God and feel like it wasn't so much on my shoulders.
Mm.
I can remember when I was a pastor's wife, and I felt like everybody in the congregation should love me. Well, I didn't love everybody in the congregation that much, you know? And it was kind of like I put unrealistic expectations. And I think it was because I felt as God's representative, but I think there's a balance there in turning it over to the Lord and treating all people nice, but not carrying their happiness and everything working out. Does that make sense?
That'd be good for family too.
Yeah.
Not carrying the responsibility
Right.
for others to be happy.
Yes, yes. I'd probably be a more relaxed mother.
Yeah, going back, if you could go back and redo it,
Yeah.
yeah, there have been times when I wish I could redo some of the things that have happened in my life. But so far as advice I would give, I don't know that I even have advice. But one of the things that I would encourage people to do is to build relationships,
Yeah.
make family number one. After your relationship with God, make family number one, and keep it strong. And through it all, try to help younger people to understand the importance of faith and living close to God.
Mm-hmm.
After all, when it's all said and done, we have no other hope.
It's true.
And so often, young people especially, they feel like life is forever, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we will live throughout eternity somewhere, and in that sense, it is forever. But it's how we live here and what faith in Jesus Christ means to us personally that's going to determine where we spend eternity. And I just, I cannot, well, what's happened in the last few days. One of my very best friends
Mm-hmm.
dropped dead. I mean, literally in a few seconds, he was gone. He went from earth to heaven just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was strong, he was healthy so far as anyone knew. There was no reason why this would happen. But I would like to be able to teach younger people the importance of living life for Christ. He doesn't take away our dreams. He gives strength to our dreams. He provides new visions. It's not that God doesn't want to in any way limit our lives. He wants to strengthen, to bless us. And I think that's what I'd like to give. That's what I wanted to give to my grandchildren.
Yeah. And I think it's that love, that desire. It's the reason you all are here today, because tomorrow you're going to start driving to Florida to be there in person for one of your very dearest friends, to be there with Kathy and the whole family as she navigates the unbelievable sudden loss of her husband and a dad and a grandfather and so much more for so many. Mom, Dad, thank you for having the conversation, sharing your life, a little bit of your love story, a little bit of the current reality of, I call it a struggle, but I think you guys are living that passage in James. Consider it pure joy when you face trials, hardships of many kind. It develops our faith, it builds our love, and it helps us to get to a place of completeness to fulfill the calling He has on each of our lives.
But it doesn't mean when I lay my head down at night that the devil doesn't tempt me to begin to fear and begin to, wonder, why God, why me?
Yeah.
But it doesn't take long before I realize that God's in control, and I just have to live in peace.
Yeah.
Otherwise, life is not worth living.
Amen. Dad, there's a lot of people who lay their head on the pillow at night and they ask why. And it could be the mom with little kids whose husbands walked out the door. It can be the dad who just lost his job and he's trying to figure out how he's going to meet needs for his family. It can be the college student who's trying to figure out which path to go in life. It can be the person who struggles silently with some type of an addiction or some pattern of thinking or living. I would be honored if you would pray for us, and particularly pray for the person who's listening right now, and whether it's relational, financial, maybe it's health related, but they're struggling, and they're struggling with that, trying to figure out, are they going to trust? What are they going to do in this life? What their next step is? Would you pray for that person right now as we wrap up our time?
I will. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for the reality of your love and your mercy and your grace. Thank you for the privilege of being able to worship you and to allow you to have control of our lives. And we recognize, Father, that life does have a way of bringing things into our lives that we don't understand. And maybe we are tempted from time to time to ask why. But that's not the question we should be asking. The question I want to ask, and the question that I would like for everyone listening to ask is, but what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with Christ? And why am I not trusting the God who is able to do more than we can even ask or think? And Father, I pray right now for any individual listening here who's going through a tough time in his life, big decisions to make. Perhaps it is a physical problem that they have or whatever. I pray, Father, that you will help everyone to just learn the true meaning of trust. Mm-hmm. God simply says, trust me, child. And so that's what we want to do. And I pray that you will make that a reality in the heart and life of everyone listening. Thank you, Father. Thank you for Jesus, for the privilege of knowing him and living for him. And I pray, Father, in whatever amount of time each of us has on this earth, that you will help us to allow you to have first place, and that we'll do everything we can do to live as close to you and to be as much like Jesus as we possibly can. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the More with Murphy podcast. It's our hope that listening will help you discover and embrace more in your life. If you enjoyed today's episode, go ahead and subscribe and feel free to share. You can also help us achieve more on the podcast by writing a review of the show. Positive reviews help us reach new listeners, grow the show, get new and exciting guests, and tell us what content you're loving. Who knows, we might just read your review on the show. Finally, if you want to learn more about our guests or the resources mentioned on the show, check out our website at morewithmurphy.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for More with Murphy.